lot of guys and a lot of people who were drafted in Vietnam went in and registered as a conscientious objector because they didn't think the war was right. So then you got to go before a review board, and they decide if your reasons for being a conscientious objector have any legitimacy to it. And if they do, they don't make you go. And if they don't, they make you go. And most often, what do? They make you go. But anyway, it's something to think about. Now, not only did he do that and got himself in trouble, but he also refused to report to the evacuation to take him to one of these relocation spots. So he refused to report for the Japanese-American evacuation. So I'm not doing it. Now I want you just to listen to this quote. This was his reasoning for not, and it's going to make a difference here because it's going to end up being appealed. So this is what Hirabachi said when he was asked why he refused to report. He said, "I wanted to uphold the principles of the Constitution and the curfew and evacuation orders which singled out a group on the basis of ethnicity violated them." Okay? He was saying that he was being prejudicially moved because of his race, because of his ethnic background. Well, they later tried him for refusing to report, and he was convicted in 1942. So he just couldn't do that. So he was tried for refusing to report for this Japanese-American evacuation, and he was convicted of not going in 1942. And so what did he do? Yes, but then he appealed. And he appealed to all the way to the Supreme Court. And it was called Hirabachi versus the United States, which happened in 1943. Now this is really, really interesting because the Supreme Court's going to rule on this deal. Okay, and their ruling is interesting. So Hirabachi appeals all the way to the Supreme Court. His Supreme Court hearing is in 1943, and this is what the Supreme Court ruled concerning Hirabachi versus the United States. 1, they ruled that it was allowable to remove the Japanese Americans from the West Coast on the basis of, quote, military necessity. So the Supreme Court ruled that it was allowable to remove Japanese Americans from the West Coast on the basis of, quote, military necessity. Now, if you think about this, what should they be ruling on? They should be ruling on the constitutionality of incarcerating these people in the first place. They avoided it, didn't talk about it, didn't rule on it. All they did is state that they felt it was appropriate to remove them, but they wouldn't rule on whether it was constitutionally appropriate to do it. And that was a huge mistake because what it did is it basically underscored what they called civil liberties in wartime. You know, during wartime you still have civil liberties. And so they were wrong. And it went on wrong until 1988. So the Supreme Court rules wrongly, and it took until 1988 for Congress to take responsibility for that bad Supreme Court ruling. And the Congress did 2 things in 1988 to each and every one of the Japanese Americans that were wrongly incarcerated and relocated during this time. Anybody want to know one thing they did? Well, that's what they did. First of all, they publicly apologized to all Japanese Americans that were relocated during World War II. They did this in 1988. I mean, 40-some years later, right? And there were 80,000 surviving Japanese Americans in 1988. They gave each and every one $20,000. So in 1988, Congress issued a public apology and awarded each of the 80,000 surviving Japanese Americans that were incarcerated during World War II $20,000 apiece. Maybe solved a little of the pain. Can you imagine that today? Can you imagine because you are Irish, you have Irish blood in you, that all of a sudden they're gonna come into school, and they're gonna yank you out of school and take you somewhere right away from your home and put you somewhere for several years. I mean, it just was crazy. Okay, that'll take us kids to the home front, because we have declared war and we gotta get busy. The home front, yes?
So they learned a lot of
You know, they were pretty cooperative. They really were pretty cooperative. It was a little surprising, but at the time, when your government told you to do something, you did it. Didn't like it, but they were pretty cooperative, yeah.
Are we gonna watch the debate?
Okay, Hirabachi died in 2012, January 2nd.
But he died.
Canada. Okay. Okay, the home front. Okay, back on the home front, the people who were not fighting in the war had to do their part. And that talked a lot about farmers, because farmers produced record-breaking crops during World War II, despite the fact that over 2 million farmers were fighting in the war. So farmers really stepped up on the home front after we declared war by producing record-breaking crops, despite the fact that over 2 million farmers were fighting in the war. Factories were also producing war supplies at record numbers during the war. Factories were producing war supplies at record numbers. Now I'm going to give you some examples of the amount of manufacturing that went on in the United States between July of 1940 and July of 1945. During that 5-year period of time, I'll give you several examples of what type of manufacturing was done in the United States. So during that 5-year period between July 1940 and July 1945, over 300,000 military planes were produced by factories in the United States. Over 300,000 military planes. Over 100,000 bombers. What are bombers? Right? Or bombs that drop from airplanes. Or artillery. Over 90,000 tanks were built in that 5-year period. Over 90,000 tanks. Approximately 17,000 armored cars. Over 100,000 Jeeps. Over 300,000 pieces of artillery. Over 300,000 pieces of artillery. More than 2 million trucks. More than 17 million rifles. More than 3 million machine guns. And 42 billion rounds of ammunition. So between July of 1940 and July of 1945, the United States manufactured over 300,000 military planes, over 100,000 bombers, over 90,000 tanks, over 17,000 armored cars, over 100,000 Jeeps, approximately 300,000 pieces of artillery, 2 million trucks, 17 million rifles, 3 million machine guns, and 42 billion rounds of ammunition. Now, with so many men fighting in the war, women were the ones working in the factories. So the working woman, which was unusual because a lot of women stayed home at that time. They weren't working. They were taking care of families. That's kind of how it was in the 40s and 50s. But these women had to come out of the woodwork and work in these factories because the men were fighting the war. So the big symbol of the working woman in the factories during World War II became known as Rosie the Riveter. And she was a cartoon character of a woman with a polka dot bandana and slacks wrestling around a rivet gun used to make airplanes. And I gave you a picture handed out of the poster, "We Can Do It" by Rosie the Riveter. Now this is what's kind of ironic. So, I'm going to show you Laura the Riveter. Because when we had dress-up days last week and nobody said a word, you can kind of date people a little bit. And it was, what was the day after American Day? Throwback Day. I go in the office and here's Mrs. McDonald dressed up as Rosie the Riveters.
I saw her.
Mr. Brewer, I dressed up as her last year.
You did?
Homecoming.
Pull that away. I should have got, you got a picture?
Yeah.
She has
It's
a
in
whole
the
suit
yearbook.
on.
Oh, yeah.
Is it in the yearbook?
It is. It is.
It's like this speech bubble they put on.
They're wasting so much ink.
Yeah, we got to take it.
But I want you to put this in your coffer of information. I just thought this was great. So I walk in there and just shake my head and say, you know, we're going to be talking about Rosie the Riveter next week. Let me get a picture for the kids. So you now have the poster and the Laura the Riveter right here.
They do come with one.
Yeah.
You got an extra one back there?
Yeah, we have a lot of extra. 30.
I have 20.
Here you go. Anyway, put that in your, if you see, here you go. If you see Mrs. McDonald, tell her, hey, we enjoyed your picture in our class today.
And then ask her.
Okay, that'll take us to our last thing we're talking about today and the last part of this test material, financing the war. Financing the war. Then what we're going to do is we're going to have a review on Monday and a test on Tuesday. So tomorrow, if you're here, we're going to just watch a video for fun. Okay? Debate, we can watch the debate, we can watch Curtis Martin, whatever you do. All right, I'll do the Curtis Martin thing tomorrow. Okay, financing the war. Now, does anybody want to guess what it cost the United States to fight World War II? How many dollars?
54 billion.
Okay, let's start out with that bid of 54 billion. Higher,
3 trillion.
not quite.
60 billion.
$400 billion. So the total dollar amount to fight in World War II for the United States was a staggering $400 billion. Now I want you to listen to this. This was twice the amount of money that the government spent for everything they did from 1789 to 1940. Think about that. It was twice the amount that the United States government spent for everything, including wars we were in, between 1789 and 1940. Can you believe that? That's how much World War II cost the United States. $400 billion. Twice the amount of money the United States spent for all governmental actions between the years 1789 and 1940. Now, how did we finance the war? Two sources. Two sources. First of all, taxes. 33% of the money, or $132 billion, that we spent in World War II came from the taxpayer. 33%, $132 billion. The remaining 67%, or $268 billion, came from the selling of war bonds, and we'll talk about those briefly. So the money used to finance the war came from two sources. Taxes, 33% of the money, $132 billion, and war bonds, 67% of the money, $268 billion. Now, war bonds, we kind of explained that to you. You would buy a war bond for a certain amount of money, then it would, in a certain amount of years it would be worth more money. So it was a good investment. Now I'm going to tell you a little prelude to a great story here. You've all seen the picture of the Marines lifting the flag at Mount Suramachi at Iwo Jima. Okay, we're going to get into that big time. However, here's a great story. We were needing more money about that time in 1945, and so President Roosevelt really wanted, when he got a copy of that picture, he wanted those 6 Marines and 5 Marines and 1 Navy corpsman to get back to the United States to become heroes. Well, unfortunately, he waited too long because they started looking about a month after they took the picture, and 3 of them had been already killed at Iwo Jima. And we'll talk about all this in detail later. So he brought back 3, and you know what those 3 did? They went on a promotion to try to sell more war bonds. And they sold billions of dollars worth of war bonds after those guys came back and started being the PR for that. It's a great story, and we'll kind of go from there. Now, I'm going to give you a little, I can't keep a secret very good. This new evidence, and why I gave you a new ID sheet, is they found out this summer that one of those 6 men has been misidentified for 70 years. And we're going to show you, give you information on that later in a video. It is awesome. And you'll get a chance to see that. But anyway, that's where they got a lot of the money. Several billion of these war bond sales came after those 3 survivors went around and promoted. Okay, Monday, review sheet, review, Tuesday test, then we'll move on with part 2 of World War. Now listen, some of you are going to be gone Monday. I think Brooke's going to be gone Monday. And who else is in journalism in this class? Well, Kylie?
No.
So you guys,
Not her, no.
so I know there's a couple of you. So you guys are going to have to get on this video because you'll be responsible to take the test when you get back on Tuesday. So do not forget. Okay?
Her brother, no.
Let me, Mason, I'm telling you, I just